Welcome, everyone. We are having a conversation today about the case for purpose, and I am so excited to have our wonderful guest here, Aaron Hurst. Aaron, thank you.
Oh, so exciting to be here. Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So I always ask people to share where they're coming from. So if everybody would share in the chat where you're coming from. And Aaron, where are you coming from right at
I
this moment?
am in the Madrona neighborhood of Seattle.
Awesome.
Yep.
And I know that you were recently in Chile.
Yes, just got back from Chile and then was in Chicago, so I'm hitting all the C's. But yeah, it's amazing. Like I was keynoting the National Marketing Conference in Chile, and it's amazing how much purpose has taken off in that culture. Really, really inspiring.
And how has that really emerged in that culture?
I just think they've seen that it's the differentiator when they're looking at products. And what's interesting about Chile is it's where a lot of the consumer packaged goods companies from Europe pilot products and pilot marketing. So a lot of that's happened sort of at the forefront in Chile. So therefore, a lot of these trends around purpose are actually hitting there before they're even hitting the European market. So they've really been ahead of the curve as a result of that.
Oh, that's great. And so you got to be part of that conversation. So we've got a lot of people coming in here, including Sabine is coming in from France. I actually just came back from St. Bart's, and so I got to practice some of my French. So Sabine, bienvenue. And for everyone else here who is joining, we got people coming in from Vermont, South Carolina, Wisconsin. We've got my mom, Aaron.
Hi, Mom.
Pressure now. My mom is part of this conversation, Betsy. We also have Patty coming in from Syracuse, New York, and we also have Lana coming in from Minnesota. So welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So a few words about Aaron. Aaron, you're somebody who I've really admired for a long time. And I'm sure you hear that a lot, but I really like the way you personally manifest this quest for purpose. I mean, you really have established yourself as a thought leader in this purpose space, and something I think that we're all really wrestling with and trying to figure out. But you're a social entrepreneur and really exploring different aspects of things that I imagine that you're interested in. So you're the founder of Taproot Foundation, as well as Imperative, and you're also the author of Purpose Economy. So can't wait to talk more with you about it.
Absolutely.
So let's start with talking about your 2014 book, Purpose Economy. And in this book, you make the case that purpose is the new driver of the American economy. Certainly something that has been on full display kind of post-pandemic, or as we continue to wade our way through the pandemic. And we're seeing it manifest both in the Great Resignation as well as quiet quitting, or whatever else you want to call it. So talk with us a little bit about your book and certainly what you're seeing now.
Yeah, no, I think the book really was based on my work at the Taproot Foundation. And what was wonderful about the Taproot Foundation is I got to work with the best in business, nonprofit, government, and on a global scale. And I think as a result of that, I was in a unique position to really see trends that were starting to emerge. And what I saw emerging was that us as human beings for more meaningful lives, as well as our clarity on the problems facing the planet and facing society, had pushed purpose to the forefront of where innovation was going, as well as where, as we think about the workplace, where people were prioritizing where they wanted to spend their days. And I think, if I recall, Laura, you went to Stanford. My uncle was at Stanford and in the 70s coined the term information economy, really explaining how we've gone from a agrarian to industrial to an information economy. And I put forward in the book the hypothesis of, are we now entering a fourth era of our economy in history, where our quest for meaning and our quest to really heal the world and to heal society actually is what's going to drive economic value creation? And really made the case that it's much more than being about a cause. This is really much more about a human need for community, a need to feel like you're making an impact, and a need to grow, and increased desire to make sure the world is sustainable for future generations.
And I think so much of this, Aaron, really ties back to people like Viktor Frankl, where, known for his book, The Man's Search for Meaning. We won't hold it against him for the fact that he called it Man's Search for Meaning, leaving out half the population there. But the point being, here was somebody who went through immense suffering, was a victim of the Holocaust, and lost most of his family, and really arrived at this epiphany that while we have little or no control over the circumstances in our lives at times, we always have infinite power as to how we respond to those, thus our inner freedom, but really around this quest for meaning.
Yep.
And
No, it's
go
interesting.
ahead.
It's interesting you teed off on the gender part of it, because what we've really found is that the most important thing when it comes to purpose is actually purpose mindset. And we find that there are people who have a transactional mindset, and there's people who have a purpose mindset, and they're very distinctly different ways of viewing the world. And when you have a mindset, it's like wearing a different pair of glasses where you see the same thing differently than somebody else. And the reason I bring it back to the gender piece is that we found that women are 50% more likely to have a purpose mindset than men. And we've also found that purpose mindset predicts everything from tenure to performance to fulfillment. So I think it was a major miss on his end that it was man's search, because I think in reality, actually, I think women are the leaders of this movement and this change.
And you specifically cited your mom, I believe it was, as really being a leader for you around that space. And I love that my mom is on the call now, as being that role model for really prioritizing purpose.
No, and the research shows, there's a study out of Michigan that found that your mother has a huge impact on your mindset, whereas generally your father can only have a negative impact on your mindset. So there's a lot more to unpack there, but there's something really interesting in terms of like how mindsets and how purpose is transmitted from one generation to the next. And gender, something around gender is a major player there.
Interesting. And that it's really coming through the women more so than the men. I think a lot of times men think that they're driving purpose, but often my personal experience with my father was that he was kind of critiquing it more than he was actually meaningfully driving it forward. So let's talk a little bit about the case for purpose. And I want to remind our listeners, please feel free to ask your questions along the way. I want to really make sure that we get those asked and answered along the way. So let's talk some more about why purpose. How is it good for people as well as the planet? What does the research tell us? You've already talked a little bit about this. And then certainly, how has the pandemic further influenced this pursuit of purpose?
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack there, and there's so many different definitions for purpose and different uses for it. I think about it in a couple of different ways. One is the personal business case for it, which really goes back to, again, purpose mindset, transactional mindset. And there's just sort of two different ways to live your life, and it's very clear in our data that when you embrace work as a source of fulfillment for yourself, when you embrace work as something where you can make a contribution to the world, whatever that means for you, you have better outcomes for yourself, and you're more successful in your career. You're more likely to become a leader. I mean, every single thing we measured, not taking a transactional mindset and using a purpose mindset is the better path. It's very, very clear. And I think what's really important there is it's not about working in a nonprofit. It's not about being a teacher. It's not about being a social worker. Purpose mindset, we found, is prevalent in every profession that we've studied. It's not really about the job. It's actually about what you bring to the job and how you process that job. So making the time to like really check your mindset and be able to process what you're doing every day in terms of how am I making an impact? How can I make a greater impact? Just over and over again, and study after study shows is beneficial. At the corporate level, there's, again, multiple different ways of looking at this. So I think one is from a workforce perspective. We know that organizations where people perceive that the company is about more than just profit are far more likely to stick around. They're far more likely to be productive in a sustainable way. Like in every single measure, again, like it's positive outcomes when employees perceive the company as being driven by a purpose beyond just making money. And then we know for consumers, people have much greater brand loyalty to companies where they have some sense of purpose associated with it versus where they just really have a transactional relationship with that brand. So it's almost the exact same lens. It's like a transactional lens as a buyer and then a purpose lens, and that there's so many products out there and so many options for everything we want. People are picking the ones that they feel are aligned with a broader purpose in their brand.
One of my favorite art pieces is photographer Andre Gursky, and
Okay.
he had this piece called 99 Cents, where you're in a Walmart kind of store, and there's so many products to choose from. A lot of his art expressed the idea that a lot of our anxiety comes from the fact that there's just so much choice. There's so many products that are out there. And so now that has really, what you're talking about is this, what are the companies that stand for purpose? And I'm going to choose that product as a consumer. That's going to help me to kind of thread my way through the noise, is
Yeah.
finding one that stands for purpose.
No, and it's powerful. I mean, you look at the world's largest store on Amazon, like you can now filter your products on Amazon by whether or not they're part of the climate pledge and whether or not the product
Wow.
actually is, and I think they have 50 different certifications that you can search based on because products are sustainable or, do good in many different ways. But it's not just a question of walking down the store at Safeway. It's actually now on Amazon. You can filter the whole catalog of products by that.
I did not know that. So that's a good to know. So we've got a question that just came in here from Debbie. How do you convince male leaders the value of purpose to realize the fiscal outcomes needed for successful business?
Yeah, I think again, it depends, Debbie, a little bit on like whether or not you're talking about it from a workforce perspective. And I think there's a lot of data out there that is really, really clear about the fact that employees want meaningful work. The number one reason people stated that they were quit a job and went to another job was to find more fulfilling work. So if you want to retain people, I think the data set's very clear on that front. I think from the standpoint of your ability to sell in market, I think it depends on your category, how you go about doing it. But again, you're seeing that people are selecting products, assuming that there's like a baseline of utility that's met. They're selecting products where they have a brand association that makes them feel good about themselves and where they feel like the act of actually buying is an act of making an impact. So you're helping them extend that in what they do.
Yeah, it really is this moment. I think, particularly for employees, that they want to feel like that the work that they do actually matters. And we, in our everyday lives, when we purchase products, we want to feel like that we're actually contributing to the planet and to an overall sense of good. Now, I want to just kind of dig in a little bit more around this piece around how purpose is, people are leaving if they don't feel a sense of purpose. How
Yep.
does that tie with? There's another study that came out from McKinsey showing that the number one reason why people are leaving is because they feel disrespected. So how does that kind of toxicity slash lack of respect tie to this need for purpose?
And I think broadly, like my initial reaction to that is it's all about sort of the psychology of work. And I think we've spent a lot of time focused on the function of work, the pay, like these sort of more transactional parts of work. I think both being respected, the need for your work to be meaningful are both out of like humanizing work. And I think if there's a broader message, it's about people wanting to be seen as human and to be able to operate in the ways that are truly meaningful to them, which is around being fulfilled. And it is very hard to be fulfilled at work if you don't feel respected. I think that's like a baseline of table stakes for folks to be able to like really feel like their work is meaningful.
And I think this is where, if a company is going to start to really talk about purpose and really begin to provide support for employees to be able to connect their work with a higher sense of purpose, that it also really has to be couched in those deeper human needs. And that otherwise it comes off as being superficial.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of emphasis put on the corporate purpose, and I actually find that that's less important than helping individuals connect their purpose to their day-to-day work. That ability to connect it to the broader company is important, but that's not where the day-to-day experience is. It's really in like you come into work or you join Zoom in the morning. What is the experience of that day? And there's three variables we identified that matter to people to be fulfilled that they need to focus on. The first one, which is the most important, is relationships. If you don't have meaningful relationships at work, you're not fulfilled. Like it's statistically almost impossible. People need meaningful relationships at work. People need to feel like their work is making an impact. And here, Laura, like impact that's really important to understand is not about the sort of climate change level impact. The technical definition is perceiving. So it's not even necessarily that it actually is making an impact, but you perceive that your work matters to someone other than yourself.
Hmm.
That's what sort of defines a sense of impact. And then growth, which is, do you actually feel like you're growing as a human being that you're in work? And what we found is growth isn't about learning new skills. Growth is truly about like stretching yourself. It's about having things that push you out of your comfort zone. When we have those three things, we find people are fulfilled. We find if one of those things is missing, like they're not. And that's where I think a lot of times companies have done one or two of those, but unless you do all three, you really are not meeting that need for folks.
And I'm interested, Aaron, here that so you talk about the importance of relationships, you talk about the importance of feeling like you're making an impact. And I would add to that, Aaron,
Mm.
not only are you making impact, but you're getting recognized for the impact that you make. Because
Well,
there's
so
nothing worse than when you make an impact and then somebody else gets credit for it.
which I think is part of that. No, totally. And that's part of where that definition is, right? So it's like the perception that your work mattered to someone other than yourself. So the only way to validate and know that that's true
Mhm.
is if someone else tells you that it mattered, right?
Mhm.
Which
Yes.
is that validation piece. So absolutely. And I think
And that
that's
they
something that's,
credit you for it. And then you
yep,
talked about the growth piece, which a lot
yep.
of this really aligns, of course, with the Ryan and DC research around the self-determination theory. I'm interested, though, you did not mention autonomy and the need for flexibility. So where does that figure in all of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is the less autonomy you have, the less ability you have to basically craft your job around relationships, impact, and growth. That those things become increasingly difficult. So we see it really, the more autonomous you are and the more you have a purpose mindset, the more you can shape your job around relationships, impact, and growth. And the less autonomy you have and the more transactional your mindset is, you tend to just sort of follow, you tend to just be on autopilot and work becomes meaningless to you. So autonomy is absolutely critical, but it's more of a multiplier of the other two,
Huh.
or the other variables.
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the incredible news about Patagonia going purpose as opposed to going public. How do you think that this is going to play out? And why don't you talk a little bit about, what are your thoughts on the fact that Yvonne Chenard has made this incredible statement, and what are your thoughts about how this is going to play out over time?
Yeah, I mean, I followed it somewhat. I haven't followed it super closely, so I can't go into like a tremendous amount of detail. I think there's a lot of cynicism about it just being for tax purposes, et cetera. And I think my understanding is that's not what is going on here. I think it's very consistent with behavior that we've seen from Patagonia for a long time. And I think the statement that I loved was really the one around, the fact that billionaires are a symptom of bad public policy. I think is really powerful, because it's true. There's just no need for that kind of capital in a single individual. And I think there was a fundamental recognition of that. There's been talk about it negatively impacting employees, which I don't fully understand that line of thinking. I think people want to work for an organization where there's a set of values and where they feel like there's somewhere that they admire. And I think this really reinforces that. And in no way diminishes their ability to make a good income. It doesn't diminish the ability for the company to succeed. So I see nothing but upside in this process. And I don't know what the political, answer should be, but I definitely think the accumulation of wealth in our society, to the degree to which it's happening, is not healthy and it's not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, one of our shared passions, Aaron, is really around education
Yep.
and providing meaningful education for everyone, and that this is really foundational to what our society is built on. And we're
Yep.
now looking at a society that has more income inequalities than we've had in over 100 years, and so our childhood is very different from the childhood today,
Yep.
in terms of the resources that we are guaranteed. And so, one of the things that I really see, particularly in a place like the Bay Area, is that we've got these people like Mark Benioff who say that they stand for things like purpose, um, and that they say that they're really focused on making the world a better place. And yet, arguably, they're taking advantage of a system and they're the creators of a lot of the problems that we're up against in the first place.
It's well intentioned, but I don't think we can count on people to self-regulate. I don't think human beings have ever been terribly good at that. My grandmother was a refugee from Nazi Germany, back a little under, it was probably about 80 years ago, and moved to Detroit. And she described at the time like what Detroit looked like, and it looked exactly like Silicon Valley. It was this sort of booming center of innovation, right? And what brought Detroit down was really two things: income inequality and thinking that the assembly line was the solution to every problem. And I think in the Bay Area, we're seeing similar trends happening to what caused Detroit to go off the rails, where technology is seen as the answer to every problem and growing income inequality. So those both lead to instability because they basically create a lack of resilience and they create more tension. So I think we're going to continue to see that happen in the Bay Area. And I don't know if it'll go as far as Detroit did in terms of sort of coming off the tracks. But I think there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Bay Area is really kind of a microcosm of what's happening across the United States and the fallout from that instability, as you talk about. I mean, here in San Francisco, we have the highest concentration of billionaires in the world, and we also have income inequality that is on par with Brazil, which is just kind of unfathomable. And if you live in San Francisco and you can afford it, you more than likely are sending your kids to a private school as opposed to a public one. So it seems inexcusable that the area that has the highest concentration of billionaires has schools that public schools that many people don't want to send their schools to, their kids to.
No, absolutely. I mean, we moved from San Francisco to Brooklyn to a large part because of that. We're like, we can't send our kids to school in San Francisco, and we wanted to send them to public school, and we're like, Brooklyn is a better place to do that. So totally agree. And I think a lot of those things, they just become negative flywheels because you have things like what you described with the school system, which then just further perpetuates the problem, and it becomes harder and harder to turn it around.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is just, it's really interesting. I feel like that there's more and more conversations around things like purpose, and we talk about the power of purpose. We talk about why it's so important for the individual, why it's so important for a corporation and for its bottom line, why it's important for communities. And yet we seem to be having more and more of a crisis around purpose. And perhaps part of this is because of the decline in membership in religious entities. Curious about what your thoughts are around that. Did those religious communities provide a place for people to be able to tap into kind of that deeper exploration around purpose and what matters most?
Yes, and like I think they played a key role, and they continue to. I think the need is much broader than that, and I think we're also in a world now where there is like literally the world is on fire. Politically, the world's on fire. Like the forests are on fire. Like we've got significant problems in our world. So I think while religion did provide some of that, I think need for community and that place for reflection, which was incredibly important, and it delivered a set of values or beliefs. I think there's a broader piece that companies are being asked to look at, which is fundamentally addressing a set of societal problems that really do feel like they're threatening our very existence. And I think that's a very different need than what I think the religions provided for folks.
So corporations, organizations have an opportunity here to be able to start to address some of the world's most pressing problems right now. And a lot of that is connected to purpose, not only purpose for the organization, but purpose for the individual, and really this day in and day out kind of purpose, this day-to-day purpose that you talk about. So if you were to advise an organization, their leaders, they say, okay, we want to become a purpose-based organization. We want to help our employees to really feel that day-to-day purpose. What would be the top three recommendations that you would give to them?
Yeah, I mean, the Business Roundtable came up with their new sort of framework for the purpose of a company beyond shareholders. And I think that's a really good framework for people to look at in terms of how to think about your governance of your company in a way that's not just about shareholder value. I think that's one of the most important steps. And I think that is something now that a lot of companies are starting to embrace. The second thing I would say is, as leaders, you need to model this. So being able to really be clear about what is your why, what motivates you, why is the work you're doing important to you, in a way in which you can express that to people, because people really look for that from their leaders. And I think the final piece is really focus on relationships. I think this is the easiest, most important, most powerful way you can make a difference, is to figure out how are you helping to build friendships. And it looks like you've got a friend right there.
I do.
Perfect.
He wants to build relationship right now.
Very true. Is to really focus on relationships. And that's why with Imperative, we just really shifted our focus to relationships, because we found that that was the key missing link, was enabling people to actually build friendships at work, for people to actually let down their guards and build authentic connection. And that wasn't happening before the pandemic, and it definitely wasn't happening during the pandemic. So in the new world of hybrid work, like if you can't solve for human connection, a lot of these other things just fundamentally don't work. It is in that table stakes category.
And I know one of the things that you do through Imperative to really help build those relationships is just by, it's kind of these peer-to-peer connections.
Yep.
And it's that you feed meaningful questions
Yep.
to kind of fuel these peer-to-peer connections.
Yeah.
So if an organization is wanting to build purpose, and provide that kind of support for this day-to-day sense of purpose, what might be some questions that you would pose?
Oh, in that context, yeah. So the way,
Yeah.
I mean, our whole system at Imperative was designed based on research around what was preventing people from building connection. And a big part of that is people don't know how to have conversations anymore. People don't even know how to like dig deeper. They don't know how to have like conversations that truly build intimacy. So what we've really built into our conversations is just scientifically designed coaching models. That it's not so much about the topic; it's more about enabling two people to who don't necessarily know each other to quickly find commonality and to be able to, through that process, build a sense of connection and then go into a mode of helping each other do problem solving, and holding each other then accountable for taking action on that. So it's less about like a given question. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of questions in the database. It's much more about recognizing that people don't know how to have conversations, and people need help finding ways to find commonality that are the basis for conversations. And I think that's what I would encourage someone to think about is, how do you help build the skills or the infrastructure for relationships to happen? Simply just putting two people in a room is not going to make it work most of the time.
It's fascinating to me that people don't know how to just build these relationships, and how this is a skill that we've, I think, really taken for granted for a long time. And now, especially with the pandemic, that is a skill that a lot of people are really struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how strong the skill ever was. I mean, but it's certainly got. I think that the new generations entering the workforce have very poor relationship development skills, from what I can see. The pandemic has exacerbated that, and then overall, we just have a workforce where it's not a skill that was emphasized often in learning. It wasn't emphasized in training. It's something that we just sort of assume people can do, and that's just a false assumption. And I think as a CEO, you got to stop and say, um, if people are going to have relationships in my organization, which I need them to do, I have to build the infrastructure for that. It doesn't just happen on its own. And in hybrid work, it certainly doesn't happen on its own.
And what's the role that managers can play in that, helping to provide
Yeah.
that skill, to deepen that skill?
I mean, number one, they should take care of themselves. Managers need to be building relationships with other managers as a support mechanism to be able to truly like talk through their challenges, because other managers understand the challenges you're going through, and it's a psychologically safe place to do that. So for you to show up well for your team, you first got to make sure you're taking care of your needs and that you're building that support system for yourself. And then I think beyond that, it's really about creating the space on your team for these types of conversations, that you're not making every meeting and every agenda just about um, you know, task, 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 that you're actually creating space. You're encouraging relationship development inside the team, but then also outside the team. We found people said most managers don't connect them to other people outside their team.
Oh,
So that's a really easy thing for a manager to do, is to say with each person on my team, who's someone each quarter I want to connect them with to help them broaden their network. Um,
outside of the team.
yep.
Interesting.
Yep. Because people are really
Okay.
looking for diverse perspectives, and they tend to come from outside your team.
Interesting. So, for our listeners, based on our conversation today, what would you say are the top three takeaways you would like them to take from our conversation?
Yeah. So purpose is about relationships, impact, and growth. It's really important to understand like that's where it comes from. It is individual choice on whether or not to sort of embrace purpose in your work, and that we have to redesign work around um, the decision for people to actually make purpose a priority for themselves. And I think the third and final piece is just we need to pay attention to the context of what's going on in the world more broadly. And I think we all have to take some responsibility, and it's not okay just to be a bystander.
So, how do people stay in touch with you? And, well, first of all, thank you so much
Oh
for
my God, of
joining
course.
us in this conversation. Would love to hear how people can stay in touch with you. I know we had a lot of people listening in today, but tell us how we
Yeah,
can
no,
follow you.
LinkedIn's the best way. So just Aaron Hurst on LinkedIn, and definitely would love to have you connect. And if you have questions, shoot them my way. And if you want to have a deeper conversation or looking for research on a given topic, I can help point you in that direction.
And so next up, we've got Larry Green, who will be joining us on the 16th. He's the global program manager at Google for health and performance. We also have a big announcement, which is Got Engagement is a new course, online course that we're releasing that's coming out next week. It's part of Motion Infusion or My Wellness University. And so, Aaron, I cannot thank you enough for being my guest today and really deepening this conversation around why purpose matters, not only for the organization, but also for the individual, how we can do it in a more meaningful way so that it actually really makes a difference for both individuals, for teams, as well as for organizations. So thank you all to everyone who joined us in our conversation today. And again, Aaron, thank you so much. And we'll see you all on the 16th. Take care.